Hello, I'm Esther Gitu Yuwat. This is Africa 54, and here's what's coming up.
The African Union chairperson arrives in New Delhi for the G20 Summit as world leaders consider expanding the group to include the African continental body. The United Arab Emirates distributes aid to Chad to assist refugees fleeing alleged crimes against humanity in neighboring Sudan. And in our entertainment report, Heather Maxwell presents the top music news from around the world, including the death of American singer-songwriter Jimmy Buffett and new sounds from the Rolling Stones. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54.
We begin our broadcast with a deadly attack in Mali. A military camp in the country's north was attacked on Friday, just one day after two separate assaults by al-Qaeda-linked insurgents killed 49 civilians and 15 government soldiers. The military says it has responded to Friday's attack in the Gao region. Thursday's attacks targeted a passenger boat near the city of Timbuktu and a military position in Bamba, further downstream in Gao. The military junta says responsibility for the attacks was claimed by a militant jihadist organization operating in the Maghreb and West Africa. A United Nations report says al-Qaeda-affiliated and Islamic State-linked groups have almost doubled their territory in Mali in less than a year. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu is expected in India for the annual G20 Summit in New Delhi. His visit comes as Nigeria considers whether to join the group of the world's strongest economies. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi extended a special invitation to Tinubu and says consultations are underway to weigh the benefits of adding the West African nation to its ranks. Nigeria has the highest GDP in Africa, but recent reforms by the newly elected President Tinubu has drawn popular criticism and caused a drop in the value of the naira, Nigeria's currency. Meanwhile, India, which holds the rotating presidency of the G20, is expected to pitch expanding the bloc's membership to include the African Union. African Union chairperson Azali Assoumani arrived in New Delhi on Friday to a warm welcome. The two-day summit is expected to be dominated by the West and its allies. Russian President Vladimir Putin, however, will not be at the summit. Instead, he is being represented by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Other G20 leaders who are attending include U.S. President Joe Biden, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and French President Emmanuel Macron. United States Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen on Friday said she is working at the G20 Summit to build support to increase lending resources for the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to help member countries deal with multiple global challenges, including new IMF quota resources. Yellen is highlighting progress on efforts over the past year by the World Bank and other multilateral development banks to vastly expand lending resources and help tackle climate change, pandemics, and other global crises.
There's scope to do even more on financial capacity, including through some of the more medium-term recommendations of the G20 Capital Adequacy Framework Review, particularly with respect to callable capital. We're also asking Congress for $2.25 billion to boost the World Bank's concessional finance for global challenges and for crisis response. We've already made significant progress in expanding the MDB's financial capacity. The recommendations that are currently being implemented or under consideration across the MDBs could unlock an additional $200 billion over the next decade. Those are crucial additional resources for reducing poverty, advancing global health security, and combating climate change. This week also provides an opportunity to discuss debt relief. We continue to support efforts to provide predictable, orderly, and timely debt relief to countries, including under the Common Framework for Debt Treatment, where progress has been too slow.
Analysts say deeper and more entrenched divisions over Russia's war in Ukraine risk derailing progress on issues such as food security, debt distress, and global cooperation on climate change. The United Arab Emirates has set up a field hospital and is distributing aid in Chad to assist refugees fleeing alleged crimes against humanity in neighboring Sudan. However, a recent report by the Wall Street Journal says the UAE is also supplying weapons to the paramilitary group allegedly carrying out many of the atrocities. The UAE denies the accusation. Henry Wilkins reports from Adre, Chad.
Hundreds of thousands of refugees are in Chad after fleeing atrocities allegedly committed by ethnic Arab militias whom they refer to as Janjaweed. The Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, which is fighting the military in Sudan's civil war, was created from and is linked to the Janjaweed. It's led by Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hameti. One refugee described how her community came under a Janjaweed attack.
They were dressed like normal citizens. 2 or 3 of them started killing and attacking people. That's what I saw. Those Janjaweed members were burning our houses, so we started running. They killed a lot of people.
In May, representatives from a United Arab Emirates aid group visited Kafrun to draw attention to its efforts to help refugees like Badr. As the UAE promotes its humanitarian efforts in Chad, an August article by the Wall Street Journal, a US newspaper, said the UAE was supplying weapons to the RSF. The UAE has denied the allegations. VOA asked an expert on the conflict whether the allegations, if true, could prolong the conflict.
Sudan will never find peace if we don't find a way to deal with the UAE. I have been saying this like multiple times. Political leaders, whoever is going to be our statesmen and stateswomen running the country, they need to go directly and sit down with UAE leaders. What exactly do you want from Sudan?
Much of Sudan's gold output, which is largely controlled by RSF leader Hameti, is sold in the UAE. The UAE could gain on a few fronts from its reported support of the RSF in Sudan, said Brendan Novell, a PhD candidate in political science who specialises in the Horn of Africa.
I think it's a mix of political and economic interests. I think the UAE wanting to get rid of all of the Islamist elements from the former regime in Sudan. And then the economic aspect, Hameti's till, for years, he's been using the UAE as a platform for his financial activities.
Adam Abdurrahim Yunus and his family also fled Sudan because of atrocities blamed on the RSF. He echoes the feelings of many Sudanese who say Hameti should never rule the country because of the crimes committed by the RSF and Janjaweed.
The Janjaweed are killing people and waging war in Darfur. Their main goal from the beginning was for Hameti to take control away from the army and rule the country. What he has succeeded in is uniting the people against him. How can he rule those people now?
In a statement made to VOA, the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, "The UAE categorically refutes the claims and allegations detailed in your story. The UAE has not supplied arms and ammunition to any of the warring parties in Sudan since the outbreak of the conflict." The UAE has also set up a field hospital to help refugees in the same Chadian town from where the weapons allegedly supplied to the RSF originated. It has called for an end to the fighting in Sudan. Henry Wilkins, VOA News, Adre, Chad.
Let's return now to our top story on the G20 Summit, and I'm joined live from New Delhi by Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther. Philip, welcome back to Africa 54.
Good to be with you.
Now, there are proposals for Africa to join the G20 group. Do we know if this is on the agenda or is it just wishful thinking?
No, it's pretty much a done deal. It could still be scuppered by one of the G20 members, but that looks very unlikely at this point. There is high-level support for the African Union becoming a permanent member of the G20. That support coming from the Biden administration, for example, but also from Russia and China. It looks like this is going to happen. When exactly, we don't know. presumably this weekend there will be an announcement, and one can also presume that it's most likely going to be Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi who will want to make that announcement. What this does for the African Union is it gives it the same status that the European Union currently has within the G20, no longer just an invited group. It now gets a seat at the table. The 55 African member countries of the African Union thereby indirectly get that seat at the table as well. It is a pretty big announcement for the African Union, and we believe it is going to be maybe one of the few success stories really here for the Indian hosts that they will be able to announce this weekend.
Philip, what are you learning about some possible discussions here to kind of bridge the divide between the rich and poorer nations?
Yeah, it's a very high ambition, isn't it? But India and its Prime Minister Narendra Modi have made it clear that they see this G20 summit here in New Delhi as not just a big moment for India, but also a big moment for the developing world, for the so-called global south, which is represented by over half of the member countries of the G20. And the addition of the African Union as a permanent member of the G20 would already be a big step in that direction toward giving the developing world a bigger role. India, for example, wants there to be very serious discussions here about the the possible future use of alternative fuels like hydrogen, for example. That's just one example. But other problems that the developing world has to deal with more than the developed world are, for example, rising energy and fuel prices, and they come from other geopolitical problems like the war between Russia and Ukraine, and that's where you see how those things get in the way of agreements here that could further the cause of the developing world. Now, it is deemed to be a moment for the global south, though, because it's not just India now hosting the G20 summit. The next two countries who get to host the summit will be Brazil first and then South Africa. They are also members of the global south.
Philip, follow that up for us as the summit gets underway tomorrow. We'll talk again on Monday. Thank you for your insight. Philip Crowther, Associated Press Correspondent, live for us from New Delhi, India. Now, the African population was dispersed worldwide during the Atlantic, Trans-Saharan and Indian Ocean slave trades, creating African diaspora populations in regions such as the Caribbean, Europe and the Americas. A cultural event dubbed My Family Africa Reunion aims to unite people of African descent here in the Washington region and beyond to connect, celebrate and exchange ideas. The event, organized by the Kua Foundation, will showcase the diversity of the African culture that includes music, art, fashion, and food. And joining me here in studio for more insight is Anne-Marie Kua, founder of My Africa Family Reunion. Anne-Marie, welcome to Africa 54.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here.
Yes, so now family reunion, you know, is always an important part of the American culture, a time when members of the extended family congregate periodically, they meet, they eat, they talk. Now, you're from Jamaica. What prompted you to launch this My Africa Family Reunion?
It has been my dream. When I do international public health, and just from traveling all over the world, 61 countries I've worked or lived in, and everywhere I go, we're just so dispersed. And so in the Washington metropolitan area, I was born in Jamaica, but I came to Maryland at a young age. I did all my middle, high school, college in Maryland. And we just watched the populations grow and grow and grow with people from all walks of life, from all countries around the world. We're of African descent, but we are just so segregated. We're just so separated. And so the whole idea for the My Africa Family Reunion is to come together and to celebrate each other, to love on each other, to learn from each other, to create a new trajectory, so to speak.
Now, I understand there's a lot going on in the Washington, D.C. area. There are places being cleared for this event, and the stage is being set. What do you expect to achieve during the event that begins tomorrow?
Tomorrow, we expect for us to start a new path of just not making when we see another person that looks like us, they're not invisible anymore. So we are going to say hello. We're going to say, how are you? We're going to celebrate. We're going to recognize each other and start again creating that bond that was broken, that has been broken for so long.
I'm going to ask you a quick question here. Why should people attend this? What's my Africa family reunion all about? What do you want to see happen tomorrow?
I want to see us dance. I want to see us sing. I want to see us do our music. We have drummers that will be there teaching everyone how to do the drum. We have African dancers that are from different parts of Africa. We'll be having workshops. We're going to have braiding. We're going to have tying, how you tie the head wraps. We're going to have poetry. We have 21 children books that I started a publishing company 3 years ago, and we published 21 children books about us, by us, for us. The illustrations are beautiful. All the authors, we have 3 other authors, Delroy Walker, Tessa Hayden, and Sarah Collins, and they'll all be there.
I want to hear about the foods too. Food. What kind of food are we getting over there?
But the food, we have different foods that are already being sold around the area from all the different places in Africa. So you'll have all the different rice, and you have chicken, and you have all, but cooked in different ways. So we'll have the food. We can't do it without the food, of course.
All right, Anne-Marie, thank you so much. We can't wait to be there, see what's happening, and integrate, talk, and exchange ideas.
Yes.
Anne-Marie Kaur is the founder of My Africa Family Reunion. Still to come, the Rolling Stones prepare to release their new album, Hackney Diamonds. We'll have the details after the break.
Niger, Burkina Faso, Sudan, Guinea-Bissau, Chad, Mali, and just recently, Gabon. These countries have all recently experienced military coups. The military leaders say they staged the coups to stop corruption, deteriorating security, bad leadership, and among other reasons. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we ask the questions, what are the women's voices on the matter? And what do they propose as the best way forward? Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganye. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in
In other news, authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo's Ituri province say armed men attacked a village in the nation's eastern province, killing at least 18 people and injuring 12 on Thursday. The DRC's Ituri province is plagued by a myriad of armed groups and violence that has forced millions of people to flee their homes. Climate advocates are welcoming proposals by African leaders for a global carbon tax in a bid to tackle the impact of climate change in Africa, but they urge corporations to avoid passing the tax burden to consumers. At the just-ended Africa Climate Summit held in Nairobi, leaders demanded that major polluters pay less wealthy nations for the damage they cause. In Manchester United midfielder Sofiane Amrabat is pulling out of Morocco's upcoming international games because of injury. Amrabat completed a loan move to United from Fiorentina last week and is returning to the club's Carrington training base for rehabilitation work on an unspecified problem. Morocco plays Liberia in an African Cup qualifier on Saturday. Amid a sharpened geopolitical rivalry between the United States, China, and Russia, Indonesia's president delivers a forceful call to the leaders to ease tensions and avoid conflict in Southeast Asia. White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara has more from Jakarta.
At the East Asia Summit, Indonesian President Joko Widodo underscored the region's need for stability to continue its decades-long peace and prosperity.
Saya betul-betul minta
I implore all leaders of East Asian countries to make the East Asia Summit Forum a place to strengthen collaboration, a place to strengthen cooperation rather than sharpen rivalry.
The summit brings together the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, and 8 of its partners. Leaders of the U.S., China, and Russia chose to skip, sending instead their respective representatives, Vice President Kamala Harris, Premier Li Qiang, and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Harris and Lee held separate meetings with ASEAN, highlighting the strength of their countries' ties with the bloc.
The United States has an enduring commitment to Southeast Asia and more broadly to the Indo-Pacific.
Over the past 10 years, China and ASEAN have forged ahead, hand in hand, and contributed to each other's successes.
Summit leaders focused on the global impact of the war in Ukraine, North Korea's nuclear program, China's increasing assertiveness in the South China Sea, and the crisis in Myanmar.
The conflict is exacerbating existing inequalities and vulnerabilities faced by women and girls, including sexual violence, forced marriage, and human trafficking.
The summit marks the end of Harris' three-day trip to Jakarta. She returns to Washington Thursday as President Joe Biden heads for the G20 Summit in New Delhi, India. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Jakarta.
It has been nearly 5 months since civil war erupted in Sudan. The UN Refugee Agency estimates that by the end of the year, nearly 2 million people will have fled to neighboring countries. VOA's Nairobi Bureau Chief Mariama Diallo reports on a group of Sudanese artists who came together recently to deal with the trauma of the war by showcasing their work in Nairobi.
Organizers called the event Resilient Transitions, an opportunity, says curator Rahim Shaddad, to create a space where all the Sudanese artists in exile can come together and meet others like themselves.
One of the main reasons why we did this event was to sort of bring in the Sudanese artists who came here, visual artists who came here due to the war, and connect them in a way or another to the artists whom are already here in Nairobi, who have already created such a support system.
As the director of Downtown Gallery in Khartoum, Shaddad says it's been very difficult.
Most of us have lost a lot. Like for me, I lost the gallery, which hosts over 450 paintings inside.
Event co-organizer Mohamed El Hassan, also known as Mo, was director of 249 Arts and Culture in Sudan. He says the event is a way to introduce the artists to the local market and try to connect them to the world.
What it means for us is basically to support these artists who had to flee the war and come here and restart from scratch. They lost their galleries, they lost their studios, they lost even their ready art that was there. For me, the most significant thing, first of all, is for these artists to be able to produce again.
Abu Bakr Mawaz, also known as Bakri, left Khartoum a few months after the war started. He had to go through Ethiopia before landing in Kenya about a month ago.
It was just tough days, really, really tough days, because you need to sleep outside in the streets for days, waiting for your bus and waiting for visas and a lot of stuff.
Mawaz describes one painting that depicts a woman in the midst of the chaos of war. He says that through his paintings, he hopes to show the world the reality of what's happening inside Sudan.
She's sitting in here, confused, don't know what to do, and there is gunshots around her.
Tibian Bahari is another Sudanese artist who told us the war has affected her and others in different ways.
My painting has now significantly changed in terms of strength, in terms of contributing, in terms of I am also here as well. I feel angry and I'm not rushing into navigating that emotion of anger. I'm actually more dwelling into the question of what now? What can I do? How can I contribute as a diaspora?
Ibrahim Ahmad, also known as Snoopy, is an award-winning Sudanese filmmaker who, like many, was also recently displaced because of the war.
To me, I've lost almost everything, like totally everything. The only thing that I went out with was my phone. But I've lost everything because one of the reasons was that everyone thought that it will end soon, because it happened in Sudan in the past, like when there was a coup or like protest in the corona.
Ahmad says he's been building his filmmaking and video production business for the past 5 years and values the loss of equipment he left behind between $40,000 to $50,000. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Nairobi.
It's time for our entertainment report, and joining us now is Heather Maxwell, host of VOA's Music Time in Africa radio program. Hello, Heather.
Hi, Esther. Hello. Starting with sad news. American singer-songwriter Jimmy Buffett has died. The self-described beach bum turned billionaire who built a commercial empire on the success of his breakthrough hit Margaritaville 50 years ago passed away September 1st. He was 76 years old, and a statement on his website says Jimmy passed away peacefully, surrounded by his family, friends, music, and dogs, and lived his life like a song till his very last breath. He'll be remembered, he'll be missed by so many. The Mississippi native built his name touring his folk country songs around the United States in the 1970s. He mostly sang about the easy-go-lucky life on the beach with a feel-good vibe, easy melodies, and a tropical lilt. Margaritaville became a mainstay of resort musicians and a vacation favorite with its lyrics about wasting away and nothing to show but his brand new tattoo. Buffett's other popular songs included It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere, Cheeseburger in Paradise, and Changes in Latitudes, Changes in Attitudes. Now for the good news, the Rolling Stones are releasing their new album, Hackney Diamonds, the first in 18 years. It's also the first album the band has recorded without drummer Charlie Watts, who died in 2021. On September 6th, hardcore fans lined up in a heat wave outside the Hackney Empire Theatre in East London for the launch event, where inside, the Tonight Show host Jimmy Fallon interviewed the three surviving Stones on stage. Mick Jagger, 80, Keith Richards, 79, and Ronnie Wood, 76. Here's a part of that interview.
There was lots of ideas floating about, and we gathered them all together just before Christmas last year and made a go of it, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
We cut them all very quickly.
But it's been 18 years since you made it. We've been very lazy.
There was a blitz on it.
That's not very quick at all. We have done something. We've been on the road most of the time. But we were a bit too kind of like lazy, and then suddenly we said, well, we go. Let's put a deadline. Let's make a record and put a deadline. So Keith and I and Ronnie had this chat, and we said, okay, we'll make this record Christmas, and we're going to finish it by Valentine's Day.
So we made two albums.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So we went into the studio, like Ronnie said, in December, and we cut 23 tracks, and very quickly, and finished them off in January, and mixed them in February.
Hackney Diamonds will be the Stones' first studio album of new songs since A Bigger Bang in 2005. The release date is October 20th. I, for one, can't wait to hear this, as I'm sure many of you are too. That's it for me for this week. Esther, now back to you.
Thanks, Heather. Be sure to join Heather Maxwell every Friday right here for her entertainment report. And that's our show for today. We thank you for joining us on Africa 54. Have a great weekend.